Welcome to another episode of Profile. Today we're taking a look at a unique trigger sequencer from Tiptop Audio called the Trigger Riot. First, a few of the basic controls available on the Trigger Riot's control panel from top to bottom. There are 4 presets available in each of the 4 banks for a total of 16. The top row of buttons allow you to switch between different patterns in a given bank. The bottom row of buttons will allow you to switch between one of the 4 banks that are available inside the Trigger Riot. The lower row of buttons also serve to set beat sync, loop on and off, loop start, and loop end. Immediately below that, we have a tempo encoder for adjusting our beats per minute, as well as adjusting clock source, rate, and beat sync in conjunction with a couple of the other buttons here. The independent matrix button toggles between matrix and independent mode. This affects the matrix of encoders here in the center of the Trigger Riot. More on this in a moment. There is also a boss button here on the control panel, which allows you to set the master unit when you're chaining multiple Trigger Riots together. Immediately below that, we have a reset clear button. When pressed quickly, it resets the current pattern. When held, it clears the pattern. To the left of that, we have a beats per minute cycle button. This toggles to allow adjustment to the cycle start and cycle end of the internal counter. On the far left, we have a tap tempo button to allow you to change tempo based on a tap. Press once until you see the word tap, then tap twice to set your tempo. Our last button on the control panel side is the start-stop button, which is down here at the bottom. This is going to start or stop your pattern. When held, it allows for adjustment to clock source, clock rate, and adjusting reset to first or last. Our jacks on the lower left are fairly straightforward. These allow for output of the reset signal from the Trigger Riot, as well as an input for the reset of the Trigger Riot. At the very bottom, we also have a clock in to allow the Trigger Riot to synchronize to an external clock, as well as a clock output to output the internal clock from the Trigger Riot to a Tiptop Z8000 matrix sequencer or any other sequencer or module of your choice. Next, let's look at the heart of the Trigger Riot, the matrix of encoders found here in the center. You have available to you 8 trigger streams at any given time. There are 16 endless encoders to adjust streams in each row or column of the Trigger Riot. Outputs are labeled 1 through 4 on the right and A through D along the bottom. Each output has a button which acts as a mute, as well as allowing you to adjust individual encoders in independent mode. The 2 primary modes the matrix of encoders here in the center can be utilized in are matrix and independent. To change the mode, you press the button labeled Independent Matrix to switch between the 2 modes. A little more about these modes. In matrix mode, each encoder is going to act as a setting for the row as well as the column. So if I look right now, I'm in matrix mode. If I move this, I can see there's an output on my row as well as in my column. If I switch over to independent mode and I move a dial, nothing actually happens. In order to adjust in this mode, I need to hold down select and then move my dial. At that point, I have an output here. In order to get an output at the bottom, I need to hold the appropriate select button and adjust my encoder. This essentially gives you 32 different settings. So each encoder has 2 settings right on top of each other. One interesting thing to note about these settings in independent and matrix mode is that they are separate from each other, which allows you to toggle between the 2 during live performance. So if I hit matrix, I should see my previous setting that I had in matrix mode, or if I hit it again, that takes me back to my settings in independent mode. The mode button at the top is going to allow you to modify and change each of the 8 outputs on the Trigger Riot in various ways. The default mode is divide, which allows for output of triggers based on the divide setting of each encoder. These numbers range from 1 to 255 in the divide mode. The next mode, in steps, is going to allow you to set a single trigger on a given count. Probability mode allows you to set individually the probabilities of each trigger. The default is 100%, which means the trigger will fire every time, but you can adjust it anywhere in between 0 and 99% to add variation to your existing pattern. Speed mode allows for the adjustment to the time base being used for your triggers. The default is 16th notes, but it can be adjusted for quarter notes, eighth notes, 32nd notes, and 64ths. In addition, you can also set the triplet and dotted rhythms for all of these note values. What's cool here is that it modifies your triggers without modifying your tempo. The next mode is clock shift, which allows you to move a trigger by a whole clock step at each of the rotary encoders. Time shift allows you to add swing to your pattern by fine-tuning a trigger between 0 and 360. It can be used in combination with clock shift to add more interest to your pattern and is calculated after clock shift. Our last mode is pulse width. The default pulse width is set at each encoder to 25%, but can be adjusted between 0 and 99%. The final pulse width is calculated based on the division and your clock shift and time shift settings. This allows for creating further rhythmic variations with drum modules, envelope generators, or anything else you can think up. And there you have it, the Tiptop Audio Trigger Riot. Thanks for watching.